Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. David French of National Review is in for Jim Garrity today. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. And David, we were just saying before we started that you were filling in for Jim last year when all the horrific events went down in Charlottesville. And that's our good martini today, is we did not get a repeat of that over the weekend. We got some ugly things over the weekend that we'll talk about in the second martini. But the white nationalists were actually trying to have another rally this past weekend. This time they wanted to do it in Washington, D.C., Lafayette Park, right across the street from the White House. We knew going in that they were going to be vastly outnumbered. They had a permit for about 400. The counter demonstrators, Antifa and others, they had permits for, I believe, about 2,500. So they knew they were outnumbered. Ultimately, it turned out to be a couple dozen who didn't even show. They ended up riding the metro a little bit over the day. So ultimately, I don't know if it was the fact that they were outnumbered or the fact that they just knew what kind of response they were going to get. Ultimately, this turned out to be a total dud, which is a great thing. And maybe when you shine the light a little bit, the cockroaches really do scatter.
Well, yeah, I mean, this was pitiful. It was absolutely pitiful. But you know what? I think what's happening is sort of this white supremacist movement is reverting back to the norm. For a long time in recent American history, you've been able to rustle up 24 Nazis here and there. I mean, you know, the ability to find a few people who are willing to, you know, climb out from under their rock, put on a Klan hood, wear a Nazi flag, or do something like that. That's unfortunately kind of been a part of the American experience for a while. And looks like, you know, you're never going to totally get rid of these guys. But it is gratifying to see them go from the several hundred people chanting, engaging in a free-for-all with Antifa last year, culminating in that terrible car ramming terrorist attack that killed a woman. It is gratifying to see them go back down to sort of their more natural level of 2 or 3 dozen people who are sad and pathetic, outnumbered, 50-1 by counter protesters. So that's a good martini. I mean, it's kind of it's a good martini, though, only in contrast with how terrible things were last year, and only by contrast with how much the alt-right had distorted our politics for the 2 years previously. The alt-right did, in fact, have this moment between 2015 and 2017 when it was something new. It was something that was very omnipresent online, and it did have an effect on American politics. Let's not forget that Steve Bannon once declared Breitbart to be the platform for the alt-right. So it's good that it's diminished down to this. It's bad that it ever peaked where it peaked.
That's an excellent point. And I guess, hazard to say that given what happened last year, it's not surprising we got the amount of media anticipation for the rally that never happened yesterday. But do you get the sense that the media realizes what you realized at the start of your response there, that these people are crawling back into their holes, or no?
I think the smarter members of the media are. I mean, I don't think you're going to see, on the one hand, it's easy to sort of point at the media and say, oh, look at you overreacting. There's 2 or 3 dozen people here. But then you remember what happened last year. Mm-hmm. And then, when you take it in that context, you begin to understand why there might be much greater than normal media interest. But I think if you continue to see this massive media interest, where I would bet reporters were outnumbering the white supremacists by a pretty substantial margin, right, then you're going to say, look, guys, just ignore them. Ignore them. You're giving them all their oxygen. But I give the media more of a pass this year because of what happened last year, and frankly, because of what had happened, for 2+ years between 2015 and 2017, where the alt-right was incredibly potent online. And so hopefully now we're going to see things revert more to the norm, where there's just 1 or 2 dozen of these guys knocking around somewhere in some compound, not doing anything to anybody other than, just spouting their hate to themselves. But, we'll see.
No, absolutely right. So it's kind of a low bar that the white supremacists didn't have a good day as our good martini, but it's, like you said, a lot better than last year. So yes, we'll absolutely take it.
Terrorist strikes again in London.
Putin's nuclear ambitions are raising proliferation questions.
There's a new military strategy in the South China Sea.
Global events happening now mean the demand for national security professionals will spike over the next decade. America's security will depend on individuals highly trained in strategy, disruption management, and decision-making. The Daniel Morgan Graduate School of National Security prepares students for a world full of instability. Students in our state-of-the-art school, just 3 blocks from the White House, take courses in counterterrorism, U.S. nuclear weapons, Russian politics, and statecraft. Our graduates are well prepared for sought-after security positions in government and private sectors. Even more unique are the multi-full-ride scholarships provided by donors investing in future leaders. For more information, go to dmgs.org/radio. For a career in organizations like Marriott and Boeing, the CIA, or FBI, and a possible full-ride scholarship, go immediately to dmgs.org/radio. That's dmgs.org/radio.
All right, David, let's move on to our bad martini now. It's a little bit of a double-barreled one because part of it took place in Charlottesville on Saturday. Some of it took place in D.C. on Sunday. The far-left protesters, again, some of it Antifa, some of it other organizations, they kind of blend together once they start protesting here. And basically what we got was a fierce denunciation of law enforcement. We can't even play the direct clips because they're so vulgar, but bleep the police. Use your imagination there. And also they even went after the media, including shoving away the camera of an NBC crew. Yet NBC on Sunday morning, in anticipation for the rally in Lafayette Square, didn't even talk about the physical confrontation with the press. In fact, they kind of glossed over it. Here's how Willie Geist and Garrett Hake reported it.
Demonstrations in Charlottesville during the day on Saturday were peaceful, but got out of hand last night as leftist Antifa protesters lashed out at the media and the police. Today, a large rally is planned in Washington, D.C., with a big police presence to meet them. NBC's Garrett Hake is there for us. Garrett, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Willie. Yeah, D.C. police will be flooding this area later today, trying to keep separate groups of white nationalists and counter-protesters, even as they converge on this small park later tonight. Overnight, tense moments in the streets of Charlottesville, Virginia. Far-left protesters heckling the media and chanting anti-police slogans.
So, David, kudos to the media for actually explaining it and identifying them as far left as protesters. But, you know, we get hours of coverage if the crowd chants CNN sucks at a Trump rally. So you can imagine if this had happened from a different political perspective, that it would have gotten quite a bit more coverage. And what we see here from the far left is not surprising, but it's a disgusting approach to those who keep us safe.
Look, Antifa is evil. They wrap themselves up as anti-fascists. But really what they are is violent left-wing thugs. And the fact that these violent left-wing thugs sometimes will take on white supremacists doesn't mean they're not violent left-wing thugs, because that's hardly their only targets. I mean, let's not forget Antifa out west has shut down standard Republican parades or Republican presence in public squares. There was a really compelling Wall Street Journal story recently about how Antifa had besieged an ICE office and it just engaged in all kinds of horrific behavior. You've seen Antifa attack innocent people in the streets just because they were in the vicinity of a speech at Berkeley. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. You've seen brutal beatings. We're just very fortunate that Antifa hasn't killed anyone yet. I mean, I've seen videos of Antifa people hitting people in the head with bike locks and all manners of beat downs. And it's just absurd. And, you know, what's more absurd is there are some folks on the left who actually believe that these guys are somehow some sort of shock troops in the streets against fascists and shock troops in the streets against Nazis, when the reality is they're just their own mob and they're just a gang of thugs. And the more that there are some folks on the left who either turn the other way or maybe even cheer them a little bit. I mean, I don't know if you remember last year we saw Antifa, some actually prominent people tweeted out pictures comparing Antifa to the people who stormed Omaha Beach.
Yes.
What? You know, these guys are just thugs. That's what they are. They're thugs. And they're part of a movement that's actually evil. I'm heartened that there are just a few dozen white supremacists out there compared to last year. I am disheartened that there were hundreds of Antifa thugs in the streets, and disheartened at how they treated police who were there to guarantee and protect everyone's First Amendment rights. So, yeah, that's unquestionably a bad martini. And the more that these people exist in American public life, and right now larger numbers than the white supremacists who take to the streets, I think that's very discouraging.
David, whenever some obscure, and sometimes it's not an obscure person, but anytime there's any person affiliated with the GOP, everybody in the GOP is expected to respond to it, to denounce it, and that sort of thing, which we roll our eyes and we notice the double standard. So is the right thing here to put every leftist person on the record denouncing Antifa, or would that be making them do something we don't think is fair when they make us do it?
Yeah, I mean, look, here's what I would say. I don't want to play the game of that you just see it constantly on Twitter of denounce this or denounce that. But how about let's do this? Why don't we cover Antifa in the proper proportion to what they actually do? So, for example, if you had a gang of, well, you remember the standoff in Oregon with the Bundys, and how that received wall-to-wall coverage. Because they walked into and they took over some empty buildings in a wildlife refuge. I mean, that was considered insurrection. That was wall-to-wall national coverage. We have an Antifa siege of a government building in Portland, where federal employees have to be hustled out under protection, where local law enforcement refuse to protect them, and there's barely any coverage of that at all. So let's just keep these things in proportion, shall we? I'm not going to play the game of saying, hey, you denounce this, you denounce that, because if we do that, then everybody's just denouncing something all the time. But let's just keep this in proportion. Can we at least make that deal?
Yes, I think we could definitely make that deal.
We've done it. we fixed it. That's awesome.
Wow, there's actually some agreement. Let's see. I'm sure all of Twitter will agree with this, right, David?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, David, let's move on to our crazy martini now. And I'm sure when The Apprentice debuted and everyone saw how crazy Omarosa was, and everybody, of course, knew what kind of a figure Trump was at the time, that clearly these people would be working in the West Wing of the White House within less than 2 decades. But that's exactly what we had. Then, of course, Omarosa was shown the door, literally. And now she's swinging back. She's got a new book out, Unhinged, claiming Trump wants to start a race war, claims she's heard through the grapevine, essentially, that he uses racial epithets, but she cited Frank Luntz as being one of the people who told her that, and he says that never happened. And so, surprisingly, shockingly, Omarosa's credibility seems to be a little bit suspect here, but it still got her a primo slot on Meet the Press yesterday. President Trump, of course, not able to stay out of the fray. 3 tweets on this morning. Wacky Omarosa, who got fired 3 times on The Apprentice, now got fired for the last time. She never made it. Never will. She begged me for a job. Tears in her eyes. I said, okay. People in the White House hated her. She was vicious, but not smart. I would rarely see her, but heard really bad things. Nasty to people, and would constantly miss meetings and work. When General Kelly came on board, he told me she was a loser and nothing but problems. I told him to try working it out if possible, because she only said great things about me. Until she got fired. And lastly, while I know it's not presidential to take on a lowlife like Omarosa, and while I would rather not be doing so, this is a modern-day form of communication, and I know the fake news media will be working overtime to make even wacky Omarosa look legitimate as possible. Sorry. So the guy who thinks she's wacky and a loser hired her 3 times for The Apprentice and once in the White House, and I guess once in the campaign too, David. Shockingly, a falling out with President Trump leads to some questionable mudslinging from both sides here.
Who could have seen this coming? I mean, this is a shocker. This is one of the more surprising events of the Trump administration. I mean, look, reality TV president hires reality TV star, reality TV drama ensues. I mean, that's the short version of this. But the thing here that really stood out to me from that little tweet storm was, this is the most revealing portion. This is where I believe it was tweet number 2 of 3, Trump says, I told him, Kelly, to try working it out if possible, because she only said great things about me. That is the sum total of the Trump hiring philosophy. He likes people who like him. This is why what you see is this sort of competition on Fox and elsewhere to flatter the guy. because he responds to flattery. So you're going to have this unstable, thrice fired apprentice come into the actual White House because she says, great, all caps, great things about me. I mean, this is where we are. Fortunately, and a lot of smart people have made this distinction that, there is a difference between Trump and the Trump administration. And one of the things that we have seen is steadily over time, the people that have surrounded Trump have gotten a little bit better, have gotten better quality. So, remember, he came into the White House with Steve Bannon right down the hall. He came in with Michael Flynn as national security advisor. He came in, Omarosa joined. So now Omarosa's gone. Steve Bannon is gone. Michael Flynn is gone. In each case, they've been replaced by upgrades. So that's good. And there are some good, solid people working in the Trump administration. But he has had, let's just be honest, too much of an affinity for people who will tell him what he wants to hear about himself. And nobody did that better than Omarosa until she flipped. And again, who could have seen this coming?
Think she'll be back on his side for 2020, or is the die cast at this point?
Well, I don't know. It all depends on whether, she flips back and starts saying awesome things about him again. I mean, look, the level of flattery that you see out there, I will just say this, because she now has this blemish on her record, I don't know if she can flatter him enough after this blemish. But, time will tell. We'll see.
Yeah. She'll probably be a CNN contributor by the end of the week.
Yeah. She'll have her pick of offers, I'm sure.
That's right. David, great to have you with us. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to tomorrow.
Absolutely. David French of National Review, in for Jim Garrity. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. And be sure to tune in again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.